John Sykes was born in England on July 1959. He didn't start learning to play the guitar until he was 14 on the island off of Spain, Ibiza, where he went to live with his uncle, a blues guitarist. John remembers that there was not much else to do. In 1976, John came back to England. He had neither money nor work, so he practiced the guitar all day long, and soon he joined Street Fighter, a local band in Blackpool. In July 1980, John answered an ad in a magazine looking for a solo guitarist, and he joined the band called Tigers of Pantang. In the early days as a guitar player, Sykes listened to Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple a lot. Those were his top favorite bands. Jimmy Page and Ritchie Blackmore were his guitar heroes. And a few years later, when he heard Gary Moore, Gary became one of his guitar heroes as well. For the first time, young John Sykes saw Gary Moore on BBC's Sight and Sound in 1977. He was impressed by Gary Moore's outstanding performance, and eventually Gary became his guitar hero. Gary Moore was a huge influence on John's playing. John also used that emotional, melodic, and expressive style with fast and aggressive runs in his lead playing. Later, John got a chance being introduced to Gary Moore by heavy metal producer Chris Tangarides. Chris Tangarides started his career in the music business in 1974 as an apprentice at Morgan Studios in London, one of the major independent recording studios in the UK at the time. In the late 70s, he engineered and mixed albums of new wave acts, among which was Colosseum 2. Chris became a friend of Gary Moore's, who gave him his first job as a producer on Gary Moore's first solo album, Back on the Streets. The song Parisian Walkway, sung by Phil Lynott and contained in the album, was a hit in the UK. So, in 1981, Tigers of Pantang were recording the Spellbound album at Morgan Studios in Willesden, North London. Chris Tangarides was the producer. According to Rob Weir, a guitarist of Tigers of Pantang, John Sykes was a huge fan of Gary Moore's, and John asked Chris if he could meet him. Chris was a good friend of Gary's and worked extensively with him. So, Chris introduced John Sykes to Gary Moore. Gary was at the studio quite a lot and even brought amps and guitars for John to try. One day, when Tigers of Pantang were having their usual after-recording drink and discussion in the downstairs bar at Morgan Studios, Gary Moore walked in. Together they had a few drinks, which Rob invented. It was a shot or two of vodka in a wine glass topped with white wine. Then Gary, Rob, and John jumped up into a taxi and headed for Dingwalls, a rock venue on Camden Lock in West London. Gary was always generous, and he bought a full case of 24 Holstein Pils lager cans on the way. They opened some of the cans in the back of the car, and Gary gave 2 cans to the driver, a large Jamaican with incredible dreadlocks. On their way to Dingwalls, Gary saw some girls and shouted out the window asking them if they wanted to join the party. So the girls got in, and the party started in the back of the car. When the cab stopped, everybody got out of the car, fell on the ground laughing like hyenas. Finally, they got to the club, and Gary bought more drinks in the bar. There was an act on the stage which was quite interesting. A guy, Nash, who wore a full white head mask and top hat, played electric violin, specializing in covers of the day like Smoke on the Water. So eventually, Rob felt sick, left Gary and John, and went home. The next day, Tigers of Pantang had a meeting at Cream, who were putting together the Spellbound album cover. They were choosing photos, and Rob had alcoholic poisoning. He was ill for days. John and Gary were perfect. Looks like he had drunk his special drink too much. John and Gary skipped theirs. When Gary Moore died in 2011, John Sykes posted the following message on his official website. Our condolences to the family of Gary Moore, one of the greatest guitar players ever. A very sad loss for the music world. His playing will inspire generations to come. God bless, love, and respect. And I would like to personally say John Sykes is one of the coolest guys I've ever met. He was the only one who asked me about my equipment and, was truly interested in what I was playing and what I was doing. And he's a gentleman through and through.